Our breaking story and our top story tonight is these new and horrific images emerging of what is happening thanks to Trump administration policies inside a Texas detention center as Donald Trump and his attorney general defend this policy of explicitly ripping migrant children away from their parents. Now today, protests erupting across the country, including House Republicans facing pressure to try to stop what some call a zero-tolerance policy at the border. There's a congresswoman who has visited a detention center in Washington state, looking at the problem that we're facing today, looking at why this is such a humanitarian crisis. The U.S. government now in the business of separating children from their mothers. Now, she just spoke out on these heartbreaking stories.
Many of these mothers have been there in detention, various detention facilities, for over a month. Not a one of them had spoken to their children. Only 2 of them knew where their children were, but the rest of them had no idea where their children were. And they wept every single time they talked about their children. And they talked about how they were deceived, how their children were taken away from them through deception. The mothers were literally sitting in a room next to where the children were being held and could hear their children screaming, could not hug them, could not explain anything to them, and just were heartbroken.
That is very chilling testimony, a chilling account from a member of Congress about what we're seeing, a policy of deliberate orphaning, of separating people from their own children, and everything we know about this, and we're about to speak to some experts who can explain it in more depth, a policy of deliberate traumatizing of children. Now, we don't do a lot of Bible talk here in the news. People can make up their own minds. I did learn that you're supposed to love the stranger, for you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. That's one verse I remember. But today, the representative of the President of the United States explained this policy, this treatment of children, by citing, of all things, the Bible.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes.
It is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible.
Putting aside the fact that the Bible is, under our Constitution, not the framework to resolve these issues, which the Attorney General knows, even if the White House spokesperson does not know that. Let's look at what else we have here. Jeff Sessions dismissing all of these concerns from experts and families by saying these migrant children who are ripped from their parents' arms are actually well cared for.
This is HHS, Health and Human Services, something entirely different from the criminal justice system, to take care of these children in a good and decent and proper way. They are provided food and education in their native language, health and dental care. We transport them where they want to go while they're in the country.
That is the representation of the Trump administration about what they're doing. We show you that so you can see their version of events. What we are seeing, though, on the ground and journalistically is very different. Here's what's happening inside the Casa Padre shelter in Texas. Children sleeping in these dorm-style rooms, very little personal space, 5 to a room. These are built to house 4. Each child wearing bracelets to identify themselves, and they're scanned as they get their food from the cafeteria. Our own NBC reporter, Jacob Soboroff, is one of the reporters who got an inside look where children are locked inside for up to 22 hours a day. A shelter employee telling reporters to smile at the children because they, quote, feel like animals in a cage being looked at. Now, there is pushback, some in both parties, as I mentioned. Democrats are saying that these are atrocities and chastising this policy, which is policy in America today, as un-American.
Separating children from parents, denying relief to victims of brutal domestic violence, that's not going to make our country better. That's un-American.
I can't think of anything more cruel, more inhumane. It's psychological torture.
It's simply appalling and inexcusable.
It's just plain wrong, regardless of circumstances, to take children away from their mothers and fathers.
This is barbaric. This is not what America is.
I'm joined now for a special discussion on this Congressman Adriano Espailla, a Democrat from New York, the first Dominican-American to be elected to Congress and formerly an undocumented immigrant himself. Jorge Barron, Executive Director of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And with me in New York, Alicia Menendez, a contributing editor for Bustle and host of the Latina to Latina podcast. Thank you all. Congressman, I begin with you. Is this a humanitarian crisis caused by the U.S. government?
There's no question about it. These are asylum seekers. We are prosecuting people that are fleeing from violence, in some cases from natural disasters, from very adverse conditions, and we're treating them as criminals. Not only that, but we're stripping their children away from them. How unholy is that? This amounts to child abuse. Most experts understand and know that when a child is brutally or forcibly or separated from his or her mother, they are traumatized in short-term and long-term. So this amounts to child abuse, and the government is perpetrating that kind of behavior. I haven't seen anything like this, and the whole world is watching. It even caught the attention of the United Nations. The Human Rights Unit there has asked the Trump administration to halt this practice.
Congressman, take a listen to what Speaker Ryan said today.
Are you comfortable with the current zero-tolerance policy leading to parents and children being separated at the border?
No, I'm not. We don't want kids to be separated from their parents.
If Speaker Ryan doesn't want this outcome, is he doing everything possible to prevent it?
Absolutely not. In fact, they're just backpedaling. These children are being held in jail-type holding facilities that restrict their movement for 22 hours a day, allowing them only to go into the courtyard for 1 hour. They're restricted hours. They under heavy surveillance. This is clearly a jail-type situation for children. They're 11 years old, 10, 9, 8 years old, some as young as 4 and 3 years old. These are children. For God's sake, America, what's happening to your soul?
Let me play for Jorge Barron another claim by the Attorney General on how typical this is. Take a listen.
Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified, and it's really a very short period of time. Normally, the adults are only held in custody for a week or 2 or 3.
Not unusual, not unjustified is the claim, Jorge. Your response?
Well, I think I wish you would go ahead and...
Sorry, I was just going to go to Jorge now, and then Congressman will come right back to you. My apologies.
Thank you.
So I wish the Attorney General would come and speak to the women that I've had a chance to talk to at the federal detention here in SeaTac, because those mothers have been held for over a month now. They're still waiting for even the preliminary step of getting what's called a credible fear interview, which should happen in the first week that they're detained, but hasn't happened yet. And they've been separated from their children for a long time. So I think this is highly unusual that we've had asylum seekers being separated from their children, held for this extended period of time, and not being able to be reunified with their children.
And again, these are questions I guess it's part of my job to ask, so I'll just ask. Does your knowledge and expertise on this suggest that this is traumatizing and abusive to the children when they're separated from their parents this way?
Absolutely. I mean, it's traumatizing on both ends. I can tell you I've personally talked to 4 mothers of children ages 6, 11, 9, and 15. And for them, it's, the question that they kept asking me when I interviewed them was, when am I going to be reunified with my children? They had heard through a relative about one of their kids.
What's the answer to that?
Well, the answer to that is, I don't know, honestly, because we don't know how long it's going to be, because they haven't had even these preliminary interviews that are necessary for them to move on in the asylum process. We're certainly looking at legal challenges to try to figure out if they can be released as soon as possible. But the reality is that they could be here for extended periods of time.
Alicia, and then back to the congressman as promised.
You know, one of the things that policy analysts are quick to point out is that some of these children are very, very young. In some cases, in most cases, they don't speak English. It's not their primary language. Some of them don't even have language skills. So the level of trauma is hard to assess. You're framing this as a humanitarian crisis, and certainly what's happening on this side of the border is a part of that crisis. But we also have to be honest about what is happening in these Central American countries that is driving these immigrants over the border, that is forcing someone to make the choice where they are willing to take their child and risk this type of treatment on this side of the border. You know, I was in El Salvador reporting prior to this policy being put in place, but I would ask mothers, you know, you're sending your child by themselves with the risk that you may never see them again, by the risk that they may be taken advantage of in that cross across the border. And the mother said, what other choice do I have? And that is a big part of the reason that we're having this conversation today. Congressman?
Well, if the Republican they really want to keep families together and they don't want to split these families apart for months, they'll be willing. They'll have an opportunity to do that. Next week, we'll be introducing legislation to treat asylum seekers in a different way. These are folks, again, that are fleeing from very adverse conditions. To unite families, to keep them together while they're at the border or they cross to the United States. This will be a major piece of legislation that would give the Republicans the opportunity to be on the right side of history and to once again feel holy within themselves.
I want everyone to stay with me as we bring in another special expert on this with some historical context. Now, today the Trump administration was announcing the border town of Tornillo, Texas will be the site of this first tent city, which is a sign of the permanence of this plan. 450 children there housed in these outdoor tents, an area where the average summer temperature can, of course, reach the high 90s. For perspective on this, I want to show you Dr. Satsuki Ina, a child therapist, a professor at California State University. She was actually born in a Japanese internment camp on American soil during World War II, and she produced the documentary Children of the Camps and has treated immigrant families held by authorities in similar situations. Dr. Ina, what is on your mind? What can you educate us about all this?
Well, I'm gravely concerned about these children. You know, they were traumatized at home, and the mothers that I interviewed described the limited choices they had, where threats to their well-being meant that they were going to be separated from their children at home. The gangs threatened to take the boys to be a part of the gang activity, and threatened to take the daughters to be part of the sex trafficking industry. And the one mother that I spoke to said that she felt that if she wanted to stay with her children, she needed to leave the country. And so she attempted this journey to come to the United States. And she was told by the coyote that brought her across that when she came to the border to put her hands out and to just say the word asylum and that they would be taken care of. But instead, these women that I interviewed at the Carnes Family Detention Center in South Texas were handcuffed and put in temporary detention on a cement floor overnight until they were transferred to the prison at Carnes. So these mothers sacrificed everything they had so that the children could stay with them. So to find that now the children are being separated from the mothers is just unbelievably inhumane.
When you hear Trump administration officials say their explicit goal is to treat these families this way to deter other asylum seekers, what's your response?
I think that's a cruel and horrible punishment that's being inflicted on the children, that they're using the children, punishing the children in order to send a message back home so that others won't seek asylum. And, you know, these are innocent victims of a horrible trauma that will last with them for a lifetime.
Stay with me. Alicia, I want to ask you about how this is playing out, because these are decisions that are coming out of Washington. There's a ton of hyperbole. There's a ton of distraction. And yet it's the actual facts of what we're hearing from these families and from people who've come up close and observed it, and these members of Congress who can get closer sometimes than even credentialed reporters, that give us a feeling of what's happening to these families. And so this was part of a tense exchange here in the White House briefing today. Take a listen.
You're a parent. Don't you have any empathy for what these people are going through? They have less than you do. You throw children in cages. You're a parent. You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead.
It's in the Bible to
That's
follow
not
the
what
law.
I said, and I know it's hard for you to understand. Even short sentences, I guess, and please don't take my words out of context, but the separation of a legal family.
It's tense there, and it can look like the normal drama, but that drama, at least according to some of those people in the room, is about the moral center of what this administration is doing.
Right. There's a moral center, and already because of these policies, the conversation has shifted so far to the right, So you have the zero tolerance policy, which means you have all of these children overtaxing the system. There's now conversations about tent cities, about children sleeping in tents so that we can have a place to house them, which then makes something like family detention centers, which were once, somewhere in the middle of this conversation, suddenly seem like a leftist alternative to the tent cities.
And to your point, tent cities is what the Trump administration is calling it. There are critics calling them camps.
Right, and so they have effectively shifted the conversation to the right, such that you used to have congressional Democrats hitting the Obama administration over the use of family detention facilities, and now in this new world order, all of a sudden family detention facilities seem like a better option.
Yeah. Alicia Menendez, Jorge Barron, Congressman Espia, and Dr. Ina, thanks to each of you. We're going to stay on this story. There's a lot of other big stories today, including a new suit by the top law enforcement official in New York against Donald Trump, alleging he ran his charity for personal benefit and may have violated laws. We're actually going to speak to the candidate to fill that post in New York. Also, my exclusive reporting what Michael Cohen's predecessor as Donald Trump's chief lawyer is telling me about whether Cohen may flip. It's fascinating, and I want to get into that tonight. Also, I'm going to break down something you may have heard about. It's finally out, the DOJ report on James Comey and, yes, the Clinton probe. I'm Ari Melber. You're watching The Beat on MSNBC. There's a significant new legal case filed today against Donald Trump, and it cuts against the way he's always bragged about being rich.
I don't need anybody's money. It's nice. I don't need anybody's money. I'm using my own money. I'm really rich. I have a total net worth, and now with the increase, it'll be well over $10 billion. I'm not doing that to brag, because you know what? I don't have to brag. I don't have to, believe it or not.
He doesn't have to brag, but keep all of those comments in mind because they're central to what's happening. A rich man, allegedly, accused now of using his own charity's money to pay personal legal bills. If you're rich, why would you need to do that? The news is that the New York Attorney General has this lawsuit today alleging that Trump's charity engaged in potentially illegal conduct. There's plenty to unpack, but a few key points. The lawsuit claims that Trump bought a $10,000 portrait of himself with his charity's money to hang at his own for-profit resort, spent another $100K from the foundation on legal bills, again, to settle something at his for-profit Mar-a-Lago property. There's the note he wrote about it, and then another legal bill settled with foundation money, $158,000 for, yes, another for-profit golf club. I'm joined by Zephyr Teachout. She is a Democratic candidate running for the office that filed this suit today. Elliot Williams, a former prosecutor and Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and Bill Kristol, founder and editor of the Weekly Standard. Let's look at it like this. Elliot, is it a strong case? And does it make Donald Trump look cheap, broke, or just having poor judgment?
Or all of the above. After watching your last segment on immigration, Ari, I'm surprised that someone's not going to come out and say, give to God what is God and Caesar what is Caesar's here, because ultimately we are normalizing conduct by the president that involves acts of fraud and unfair dealing. It's hard to assess whether it's a good case now. What we do know for a fact, though, is that there's actionable evidence of campaign finance violations, tax violations that, frankly, now are par for the course. We are getting used to lawsuits being brought against the president for all kinds of unfair conduct or inappropriate conduct. And so the question we really need to be asking is, why does this keep happening, and why are we almost getting immune to it or getting numb to it, Ari?
Bill?
Well, we knew all this, most of this stuff in the campaign. We certainly knew about his checkered, to be polite, business past. I'm out here in San Francisco. I happened to see someone today who was from New York and involved in the real estate business. It was an absolute open secret. I guess it wasn't a secret. It was an openly known fact that you couldn't do business with Donald Trump. You didn't want to be in deals with Donald Trump. And his use of the foundation for maybe personal gain or for personal vanity. I mean, don't you have a $10,000 portrait of yourself, Ari, paid for by NBC in your office? I mean, doesn't everyone do that? Or by a foundation that's supposed to be helping kids?
It may be worth $10,000. It's just a selfie with a really good filter.
Exactly.
So,
right.
you know, eye of the beholder, Bill.
But I mean, I do think, so look, I mean, obviously these things should be investigated as is appropriate. I always come back to Mueller in the sense that if at the end of the day Trump's presidency is going to be fundamentally affected, I think it will be because of either a conspiracy during the campaign and or obstruction of justice as president. Things he had, as I say, his was not a spotless business career, to say the least. Once he gets elected, I'm not sure, I mean, people should appropriately follow the law and investigate things, but I'm not sure much of that ends up making a big difference.
Zephyr, you're running for this exact office. Your take on the case today?
I actually think this is a really big deal. The lawsuit is really well written. It's incredibly clear. The facts are shocking and show a pattern of illegal behavior for over 20 years by the Trump Foundation. It's an abuse of the charity, the structure of charities we have in this country. We allow for charities, give them tax-exempt status, give them a special role in our society, because we want to encourage people to give money for education or the arts or to take care of those who are less well off. And instead we have the Trump Foundation, which has board of directors that never meet, are not engaged in any decisions, and instead Donald Trump appears to use it as a kind of piggy bank, choosing to use foundation funds for his campaign. Foundation funds.
So let's look at it this way. If that's true, that's bad behavior by Trump. But if that's true, it also suggests that New York State, which has been run by many Democratic office holders, I should mention, never dealt with this while he was a very famous resident with a big charity. Why wasn't this dealt with? Because you could imagine some people thinking, well, wait, is this political? Is it only because he's president now?
Yeah, I mean, I want to really credit Barbara Underwood, who's our Attorney General, who stepped in after Eric Schneiderman resigned.
But the premise of my question is not to credit her. The premise of my question is, if you're right that this is bad, why did he have to become president before New York woke up to these practices?
Well, we don't know how, we don't know all the details of the investigation. We know the investigation began in 2016. The lawsuit came out today.
Which sort of proves my point, no?
Well,
I mean, most of the charity stuff is older, not more recent since he became president.
It is something that you and I have talked about before. Is I actually think that it's incredibly important to be looking under the hood of powerful people, be they the president or other powerful people, in their use of charities and in their use of businesses. And one of the things this lawsuit implicates is not just the Trump Foundation, but the Trump organization.
Yeah, but I'm asking you a question about the Democratic leadership in New York State, and you're hitting Trump again, which I get.
Right.
I mean, stipulate that if true, it's bad. But you're a candidate, so you're not going to go farther than that.
Well, as you well know, I have been very critical of the corruption in New York government.
Yeah, I know. I thought you might hit this, and you have. I would say, for the benefit of viewers, Ms. Teachout has made many of these points. Elliot, your thought on that point and where this case heads?
But you know, I want to piggyback on that point, the politics point. It's a very, very important one. Ari, you're an attorney too. You know, investigations take a long time to build, and sometimes it might take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to build a good, strong case.
Are you also defending this? I'm going to go to Bill. Bill, this is a thing where the stuff may be bad, but they're late to it now that he became president. I think we have to be honest about that.
Donald Trump had very close.
Others.
Donald Trump had very close relations with lawmakers of both parties in New York State and New York City, and was treated with kid gloves for a lot of abuses that he shouldn't have been. Well, I don't know why Zephyr Teachout doesn't want to say that. She's supposed to be a radical critic of the status quo in the Democratic Party, you know?
Ari, if I may, another point.
I'll go Elliot and then Zephyr.
But, you know, let's also look at Barbara Underwood, and let's look at the men and women of the New York State Attorney General's office. Barbara Underwood has been a prosecutor since, I believe, 1982, has never run for office, is not running for office. And so to sort of the suggestion that this might be politically motivated, it's just not.
No, it's not motivated. It's not motivated. You finally had to get someone in who wasn't an elected official to do the right thing. That's exactly the point.
Yeah, that is kind of the point. I do, because we've raised it. I'm running short on time, but Zephyr, your response.
I think the deeper point here is that it's Trump Foundation and Trump Organization But it's not just Trump Foundation or Trump Organization. There is illegal activity, and the New York Attorney General's office, as I said to you recently, should step up. I do think it's important to honor the work of Barbara Underwood in stepping up, but we need more of that. More of this kind of aggressive litigation that goes to the foundations, that follows the money.
Right. Zephyr Teachout, Elliot Williams, Bill Kristol, a robust exchange, not just taking the easy shots. I think each of you up ahead on the beat, a lot of noise about this DOJ report on Comey. I'm going to give you my legal breakdown on the facts and the part of it that matters, including why Comey was busted today for using personal email. But first, we have been speaking with Donald Trump's former lawyer, Jay Goldberg. You may remember him. He was Michael Cohen's Michael Cohen, effectively. He had that job before him. Now, what he is saying exclusively tonight about possible flipping will be back in 60 seconds. The other big story tonight, new heat on Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. He's now preparing to change up his legal team and reportedly struggling with their fees. Now, today I just spoke with Cohen's predecessor as Trump's top lawyer, a man you may have seen named Jay Goldberg. Now, in a moment, I'm going to speak with Nick Ackerman about what we're hearing, but here's the context. I had big questions for Jay, and here's what he told me about the new legal pressure facing Cohen now. Today, do you think Michael Cohen is more likely to flip than before?
He's more likely to flip because he's now facing the prospect of lawyers pressuring him for additional legal fees.
A lot of speculation out there, but that's the voice of Jay Goldberg, who says he still has attorney-client privilege with Trump and who was there before Cohen, and he thinks Cohen is now more likely to cooperate with the feds. So then I asked Goldberg about the nature of the pressures facing Cohen. Nick, take a listen to this as well so we can discuss. Do you think that Michael Cohen is under pressure for things he did for himself or for things he did for Donald Trump?
I think both. I think you have to understand something that hasn't been made clear enough, and I hope you understand it. Every builder in New York City is the subject of mob influence by unions. The mob will tell a builder, unless you give me a portion of monies, you will have labor strife. And this will, or there will be garbage not picked up on time. Now, you have to ask yourself, and nobody has mentioned this, why is the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District investigating Michael Cohen? Why? Is it Russia? No. Is it labor racketeering? Yes.
Do you think the feds may have evidence that Michael Cohen fixed things, as you say, for Trump, for the mob?
I think that Michael Cohen regaled people with the fact that he was connected to mob influence.
As I mentioned, Nick Ackerman's here along with former federal prosecutor John Flannery. Nick?
Jay Goldberg would know. I first met Jay Goldberg when he represented Funzi Thierry when I was prosecuting him as the boss of the Genovese family. Jay Goldberg represented Thierry and he represented other members of that family. If anybody knows about the mob and has an inside story on that, it's Jay Goldberg.
So when he talks about the Cohen's regaling his word, people with stories of fixing Donald Trump's mob problems, you're saying he's not talking about the mob in theory or in imagination. He has his own knowledge.
Oh, he knows, because he was representing. I mean, I'll give you one example. With this Thierry case, I had 4 witnesses in the witness protection program, all of whom Jay Goldberg was cross-examining. He knows what it means for a witness to flip. He knows what it means when somebody cooperates. And he also understands that somebody like Cohen can cooperate because all of those records that have been seized from his office provide a blueprint for whatever crimes he's committed. If he was in Prague dealing with the Russians, there's going to be evidence in the record.
John, mob ties, go ahead.
Well, you know, Trump has this long association before Roy Cohn passed to his final reward, and the association with the mob in a variety of ways, the building industry, the failed casinos, you have to wonder about those, how a casino fails. And so I felt like he was pulling a Rudy in a way, because he's introducing an aspect that Cohen is dealing with the mob for Trump, which is kind of an astonishing thing. And I haven't seen anything publicly saying that that's what the investigation's about.
But this is coming from an individual who represented Donald Trump for a long time. I mean, part of what we try to do here in reporting this out is talk to the people who are close to it. Isn't that pretty striking coming from him tonight?
Well, it's striking. I mean, I think he may open up a whole other investigation. I mean, Rudy gave us how he funneled money to pay off tricks for Mr. Trump, and now we're talking about how the fixer also maybe takes care of the mob. You know, Trump has been compared to the kind of a godfather person who expects omerta in one direction of loyalty toward him, and this would be perfect because he's had people in his tower who are associated with the mob, and there's been talk about what he's done in various projects before. It'd be pretty scary to have a made fella or an associate of the organized crime network sitting in the White House determining our foreign policy and our law enforcement policy.
Well, and look, this is surfacing from Jay Goldberg. He, as Nick mentions, has a long practice history in New York. He has his reasons. He's been on the show before, but we consider this newsworthy tonight. Nick, right. I also asked him about the allegations of witness tampering with regard to Paul Manafort. And one thing I'll mention for context for viewers is Goldberg appears intent on showcasing what he views as problematic behavior by Cohen and Manafort. Context for that being there are people around Trump who want to just say, yeah, maybe these are the worst guys ever, but they're rogue bad guys. Here he was saying that if Mueller can prove it, witness tampering is a huge deal, re Manafort. Take a look. Is Paul Manafort in danger of being jailed before trial?
Well, he is. Tampering with a witness is of great consequence in the federal system. And if Mueller can make a showing that while he's at liberty, he presents a risk of intimidating or influencing witnesses to testify in a way inconsistent with the truth, he could very well find himself remanded.
Oh, I totally agree with Jay. I mean, he's absolutely right. This is a 20-year felony. It's extremely serious. And already, I mean, the only standard now for the judge tomorrow in terms of whether she remands him or not is whether or not the government has probable cause that Manafort was tampering with witnesses. The grand jury's already spoken on that.
Low bar.
Right, it's a low bar. The grand jury's already found.
This is the thing. There's so much disagreement these days. But Jay Goldberg, Trump lawyer, and Nick Ackerman, a prosecutor who I think is fair to say is critical of Donald Trump.
It's fair to say.
Fair to say. Right. Agree tonight that tomorrow might be the first step to Manafort going to jail. The other thing I want to play, John, you mentioned Rudy. Take a listen to a somewhat lengthy, about a 50-second exchange we had on Rudy. Take a look.
Okay.
I told Trump that I didn't think that Giuliani was a proper lawyer for him because I think his manner is such as to draw attention away from Trump. But in retrospect, he's come out correctly in deciding not to submit Trump to interrogation by the Mueller team.
You think Giuliani's effective because even if his public performance is sloppy, it's still distracting from the actual Mueller probe?
That is true. It distracts from the Mueller probe. He's certainly not polished. And when you look at him and you hear him, you're influenced more by his delivery, which could be off-putting. And to that extent, it draws attention away from the Mueller probe.
John, briefly.
Well, briefly, I think Rudy should be arrested for impersonating a criminal defense lawyer, personally. But I don't think distracting is your objective. Aristotle said nothing improves your aim like having a target. Rudy seems to be an army of pompous phrases wandering across a vast landscape looking for an idea.
Did Aristotle say that?
No, a presidential candidate said the last part, but Aristotle said the first part about a target.
Well, I like to keep up with all the references and rhymes that come up on the show. So, John Flannery, thank you for your addition. Nick Ackerman, thank you as always. Still ahead, this mural of Trump greeting migrant children separated from their parents, something you have to see. But first, up next, my breakdown on the big new James Comey report. Today, the internal watchdog at the DOJ, Michael Horowitz, released his long-awaited report on how James Comey and the FBI handled the Clinton email probe. The report about a probe that faced intense political scrutiny, and it's already getting some of the same treatment tonight. But let's focus on the key facts and legal issues in this report, not cherry-picking it for any particular agenda. Here is how the FBI director explained the big takeaway just within the last hour.
This report did not find any evidence of political bias or improper considerations actually impacting the investigation under review.
That's one top line, but let's dig in and do this right now. The first fact that I think comes through is that under Comey, the FBI was obsessed with managing its media perception instead of just doing its job and letting the chips fall. Now, that's not illegal. It's not even always a fireable offense, but the report shows the FBI leadership obsessed with appearance and their own predictions of how a decision might play out in the political arena. Consider this: 84 references to appearance in this report, 39 mentions of reputation, another 33 to perception. And that's because there are many, many sentences in here, in this exhaustive 500-page report, about managing perception, although it finds no laws were broken. And it finds that a lot of people exercised poor judgment and then defended their choices as essential to help manage the FBI's reputation. That, for example, is how the report treats Loretta Lynch's tarmac meeting with Bill Clinton. It notes they didn't discuss the Hillary case, so it was legally okay, but it looked bad. Now, the report is much harder on James Comey. It echoes experts who says all of his public emoting about the Clinton case violated policy, but again notes those are matters of judgment. And Comey's motivation was that he thought those actions would basically make the FBI look good. As you probably know, they didn't. And Comey being Comey, he says he'd do it all over the same way.
Even in hindsight, and this has been one of the world's most painful experiences, I would make the same decision.
The report is, of course, more. It's about more than any one official, which is useful as you think about reform. Remember, Comey's deputy is Andy McCabe, and he's a key witness to potential White House obstruction. And thus he's someone Trump has targeted. So the author of this report, Michael Horowitz, departed from another DOJ policy himself and basically looked like he was obeying Trump's timeline to criticize McCabe for how he talked about his media contacts regarding the Clinton investigations. Some experts say that calls into doubt Horowitz's judgment. And now this report shows just how common FBI media contacts are. Horowitz noting profound concerns about how many unauthorized contacts there were between the FBI personnel and the press. I'm going to show you charts based on the report that show how frequent it was for FBI employees. There are all the different nodes of that circle contacting reporters in 2016 alone, or this chart where you have a reporter reaching 18 FBI employees and another reporter on the phone with FBI employees, including executives and special agents, up to 30 times. And they weren't just talking to each other. The report finds FBI employees got tickets to sporting events and golf outings and drinks with the media. And the report suggests all of that media management is excessive for the FBI. We also know, and this is kind of interesting, they weren't very good at it. The report notes that even though there were recusals specifically to avoid the appearance of a pro-Clinton bias, that's something the FBI kept secret, even though the whole purpose was to avoid a perception of bias. If something is supposed to address a public perception, it doesn't work if it's secret, which this new report notes, saying this approach, quote, made no sense. Now, if we take a breath, you might say, Ari, this is a lot of talk about perception in the media. Yes. That's the problem. We don't really need an FBI that's good at reputation management or reacting to Republicans in Congress. We need a Federal Bureau of Investigation that's good at federal investigations. This report's a reminder of how many serious people in Washington clearly don't understand how their world has already changed. These are not normal times. If you're watching the news right now, I bet you know that. But this report shows many FBI leaders operating on the ridiculous premise that if they could just publicly explain to their harshest partisan critics and their tormentors and right-wing media why they think they did the right thing, then the perception would relate to that truth, that people would treat them fairly. Maybe there was a bygone era when that was true, but it's not what happened in 2016, and you know it's not the way it works today. Now, I got to tell you something else. The report reveals an FBI agent involved in the Clinton case had really bad judgment, talking tough and writing that maybe, quote, "we'll stop it" when it comes to Trump's election. Now, that's an unacceptable motive for any FBI agent, although the good news is, for America, the report finds those kind of texts, well, they did damage the reputation, notice that obsession again, but it also finds the good news that while the agent talked tough, he did not act on that, and no one else did inside the FBI. As for reputation, there's another discovery from this report that I got to highlight for you, and actually, I think we got to go ahead and change the monitor. Can we do that? Yes. But his emails. Because this report notes that while James Comey was out there slamming Clinton for her personal email use, he was using his own personal email for FBI business. It does not get more absurd than this.
There is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
Now, you can see there from the report, it says Comey used his personal email accounts to conduct FBI business. Busted. That is new tonight. And let me tell you something. That is chutzpah on steroids times a million. Now, ultimately, law and order is not just about perception, it's about justice. The report has some pretty careful language written in a lawyerly way that still fundamentally roasts James Comey, and that adds to the public criticism about his whole handling of the case. So you may hear some people, particularly political people on the right, say all of this shows why he should be fired, which of course is a reasonable hypothetical, but also irrelevant, because the president told Lester Holt this is not why he fired Comey. And that firing itself is part of what Bob Mueller's investigating, an investigation that Trump appointees like Rod Rosenstein and the new FBI director are constitutionally required to support. And that is where the implication of some of the findings in this report matter most. Beyond perception and media contacts, if those leaders still think they can work the refs and can negotiate on due process or on the facts with the people whose stated goal is to stop investigations, to undermine law enforcement, and the current open probe, then we could all face something much more grave than perception or Inspector General reports. We could face the clash of conscience that comes when law enforcement leaders have to choose between the pressure they face, the pressure on the perception, and the Constitution they're duty-bound to serve. That could be up ahead, and that's why it's called a constitutional crisis. Take a look at what I'm about to show you. A Trump mural that now hangs in this Texas detention center we've been covering, which houses migrant children, many separated from their parents under an unusual Trump administration policy. There are murals from Trump and other presidents throughout the shelter, many with quotes about immigration. Here is Trump's message to the kids. Sometimes by losing a battle, you'll find a new way to win the war. This is offered up to many of these children. We're told are terrified there that they can win a war. And like so many things Trump, it's not original. He also used this common saying in the art of the deal, but about real estate. Sometimes by losing a battle, you find a way to win a war there. And he was talking in the book about his failed attempt to evict tenants from their homes in 1985. This is now directed at some of these children fleeing their own homes, who now find that in Trump's America, they may lose more than just the homeland they fled. They may be forced to lose their families as well. There's been a lot of reporting about the idea that Donald Trump has made the Republican Party loyal to him, not principles, especially after the elections this week. Well, Donald Trump's son has a response. Take a look.
If it's a cult, it's because they like what my father's doing. You see real Americans actually winning for a change, conservatives actually getting things done.
It is rather remarkable to see the allegation of cultism accepted and offered as a point of pride.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. You know, every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.